Gemar Chatima Tova, everybody, a good final inscription in the book of life to you and to your loved ones. This year marked 25 years of marriage for me and Dory. We celebrated last July. And we decided that the way that we wanted to celebrate our marriage for 25 years was to incorporate into the sabbatical that I was taking a big family trip. And we did. We went to the Far East. We spent almost 5 weeks in 5 different countries in the Far East. And it was fantastic. One of the countries we spent a significant amount of time in was Japan. We loved Japan. We spent time in Tokyo and Kyoto, and we also spent a day in Hiroshima. It was on August 6, 1945, when the United States sent the Enola Gay over Hiroshima, and it dropped what they called Little Boy, which was the first atomic weapon in the history of humanity. When it fell over Hiroshima, about 100,000 people died instantly, and about 60,000 more succumbed to their wounds weeks and months later. In Hiroshima, very few things survived the blast. A few buildings that were made of stone and concrete did, but most things didn't. It was decimated. We toured that day with an amazing guide. Her name was Costco. She married a professor from America named John, and they took us around and explained the history and detail of everything that was there. Making it even more potent was the fact that Costco's mother survived the blast on Hiroshima. She had just died a few years before we had met Costco, but she is a very special soul, and she was very honest and forthright with us about this trip. And we toured, and as you're touring all over Hiroshima, there are memorials and a lot of statues and reflections that are focused, in particular, on this idea of peace and the eradication of nuclear weaponry. That's the real goal of Hiroshima. Well, when you're married to someone for 25 years, you start to get some of their rhythms. You start to get some of their body language. Not always, it's still a work in progress. But 25 years, I knew something was weighing heavy on Dory. And as we finished the day, I said to her, "What's up? You seem really bothered." And she said, "I'm having a really hard time here at Hiroshima." I said, "Why?" She said, "All of this destruction, 100,000 people, most of them innocent, who had no point or involvement in the war, their lives were taken instantly. And it happened because of Americans. And I'm an American. I proudly wear a label of being an American, and I feel a sense of embarrassment and shame, and I'm bothered by it. This is hard for me." And I really appreciated her candor, and I really appreciated her expressing herself. But what we've learned in 25 years, sometimes the hard way, is that just because we're married doesn't mean we always agree. Doesn't mean we always have the same perspective. And while I did appreciate what she shared with me, I didn't agree at all. You see, Dory was in Hiroshima the end of July 2025. And I couldn't help my mind from going 25 years earlier, almost to the day. We were married on July 2nd, and a few days later, we went to our honeymoon in Hawaii. And at the time, we thought it was a moral obligation for us to visit the site at the time of the worst tragedy to happen on American soil, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So we spent a morning going to Pearl Harbor. We visited the base, the USS Arizona. We paid tribute to the almost 3,000 service people who were killed that day. We stood over that powerful and potent memorial, and we saw servicemen who were there that day who were recalling with deep pain their brothers in arms who were lying in their final resting place underneath them. And I was in Pearl Harbor while Dory was in Hiroshima. I couldn't help but think, if you don't want Hiroshima, then don't bomb Pearl Harbor. Because the truth of the matter is, had you not bombed Pearl Harbor, we probably wouldn't have been drawn into the war, at least not under those circumstances. And it would have eradicated most of the pathways that would have led to the Enola Gay, the little boy, and the bombing of Hiroshima and eventually Nagasaki. I was looking at it through a lens of absolute causality. It was because of Pearl Harbor that Hiroshima happened. But Dory wasn't. Dory was in Hiroshima. Dory was in pain. Dory was in shame. Dory was in sadness. And I was in cause and effect. And throughout Hiroshima, there's not one hint, not one suggestion, not one marker that really talks about Japan's bombing of Pearl Harbor. There's nothing that goes into detail of World War II. What is in Hiroshima is really a commitment to the eradication of all nuclear weaponry, that there never should have this weaponry again. But no mea culpas, no sense of responsibility. And there, for a moment, we were looking at something incredibly similar, but from wickedly different perspectives. And while, of course, I appreciate her perspective, and I loved her perspective, and I applaud her for sharing it with me honestly, it just isn't where I was. In some ways, it kind of reminded me of some of the worst fights I've had in my life. With Dory, with my parents, with the kids, some of you. How often people have said in any of those places, "You have caused me such pain by your tone. You have hurt my soul by your actions. You have dismissed me. You have been rude." And I, almost every time, think to myself, and too many times actually say in response, "Look what you did to cause that. Look what behavior you did to evoke that rudeness, that dismissiveness. It didn't just come out of nowhere." And as they say in Judaism, lahavdil, you are focused on Hiroshima and taking no responsibility for your Pearl Harbor. And that seems to be this wicked disconnect that happens often. And here's the interesting thing, that in my relationships, I've been on both sides of that coin. I have had people who have come at me, and I get mad and hurt and dismissed and say, "Look what you've done." And they say, "Have you taken any responsibility for what might have led to this?" Most times, I'm deaf to it. I can't hear it. But that's what they say. And when I'm on the other side, I wag a finger of blame just the same. I was really stymied with this concept, this notion. What is this? Where's this coming from? What makes Dory, an articulate, thoughtful, smart person, focused on Hiroshima? She's there. She's not moving. And what makes me in Pearl Harbor? Is it because I'm this alpha male? Is that it? Is it because that's how God made us physiologically, and she is a classic female who is empathetic and kind and thoughtful? Is that what it is? Is it because in our lives I'm the one who thinks down the road and she's the one who thinks here and now, which is a great compliment in a marriage but sometimes can lead to friction? What causes this? So I'm wrestling with this, and I'm talking to one of my great partners that I have the blessing of working with here at the temple, Rabbi Ruberg. And I'm talking about this theme with him and wrestling it out in my head. And he taught me a term I've never heard before. You might have heard of it. It's called a recency bias. A recency bias. Never heard of it. And what he explained to me is a recency bias means that all of us have different clocks and times that we work with. And how we see, hear, understand, and appreciate things work on a different bias for how we deal with the recency of the event. And that can lead to some decision-making processes, some that are great and some that are poor. Let me give you a couple examples of what that looks like. An investor who has a lot of money in one particular stock and sees it is starting to go downhill quickly over the course of 3 weeks might say, "I need to sell all of this stock now before any of it loses any more of its interest." Whereas others could say, "Yeah, you're looking at it through 3 weeks and indeed it's gone down, but look at its performance over 2.5 years." That's a recency bias. Here's another recency bias. Anyone here ever had a performance review by a superior, and the performance is focused on the last 3 weeks of something great you did or some colossal failure, but 49 weeks of your work before that seems to be forgotten? That's a recency bias. Or here's a great example Rabbi Ruberg gave me, where he said, people will look at the New York Yankees today, and they'll say, in 16 years, they've been to 1 World Series, and they're spending more on their payroll than anyone in the history of sports. What a terrible investment. And they're right, over 16 years. But over the course of baseball and sports, the winning most franchise in sports history. So what is our recency bias? How do we look at things through a lens that allows us to be in a place and a time and then work in a society with people who have different recency biases? How do we handle that? How do we metabolize that? How do we put those parts together? I want to share another recency bias with all of you. A story I learned from one of my rabbis on Israel, one of my dear friends and mentors, Rabbi Yossi, he's not a rabbi, he is now, Yossi Klein Halevi. It's the 3rd day of the 6-day war. Mutta Gore comes on the radio and says a line that every time I repeat it and hear it, chills go up my spine and I fight back tears. He says, Har Habayit bi'adenu, Har Habayit bi'adenu. The Temple Mount is in our hands. The Temple Mount is in our hands. A 2,500-year-old dream is now a reality. And 5 days earlier, the people of Israel thought this small experiment of a homeland was going to become eradicated. And now we have reunified Jerusalem and conquered lands that were historically valuable and meaningful to us. The chief rabbi of the IDF at the time was a fellow named Shlomo Goren, a wonderful man. And he came up and gathered a whole gaggle of troops at the foot of the Kotel, the Western Wall. And it came time, he said, let's pray. And as he gathered everyone for prayer, he said, today, on this random day, we will daven Hallel. The additional psalms and hymns that are said during holidays and times of revelation and jubilation, we will daven Hallel. Because today is a miraculous day and a holy day. And before he could even begin the prayer service, a group of cadets came up to him, and they said loudly, no, Rabbi Goren, we're not davening Hallel today. In fact, we're davening Tachanun, the dirges and the lamentations that are said in moments of reflection and memory and sadness. That's what we're davening today. And those soldiers said, we just spent the last hour or two picking up the bodies of our fellow brothers and sisters who fought so that we can have this miracle. The blood of my fatigues is their blood. We gathered them so their parents can say goodbye and have a final resting place for them. It's no day for Hallel. It's a day for Tachanun. Goren took this gigantic pregnant pause. It seemed to last for an hour, even though it was probably a minute. And he said, fine, we'll daven, no Hallel, no Tachanun. But what was happening there is that Goren was looking at this through the arc of a recency bias. And for Shlomo Goren, the chief rabbi of the IDF, who later becomes the chief rabbi of Israel, he's looking at this through an arc of 2,500 years, of a miracle, of the time of King David reuniting the people with their homeland. In this sacred holy place where the temple used to stand and sacrifices were offered, that we can now come back and we can pray as a free people. That is the recency bias for Shlomo Goren. And for the soldiers, they're working on 2,500 seconds. That's how long it was from when they were moving bodies in the aisleways and alleys of the old city. and the blood on their fatigues was still wet and fresh. They were working in a totally different recency bias. For them, it was radically different. And here are two people, two groups, all coming to pray, but seeing it through a totally different perspective on a recency bias. Let's fast forward that. Fast forward that to June of this year. What happened in June of this year by the IDF has been claimed by many military analysts as perhaps one of the most amazing feats in the history of warfare. That what we thought was incredible in 6 days was dwarfed by the 12 days of our assault on Iran. At worst, we set back the nuclear program, and at best, we eradicated the nuclear program and sent enough tremors to make the regime fall eventually and soon. The fact that for 12 days we flew over all of that airspace with ancient refuelers, with 40-year-old aircraft, and not one plane went down, not one soldier or airman was lost, is nothing short of a miracle. The fact that we took out all of those rocket launchers and surface-to-air missiles, and we were able to penetrate with the help of America in Isfahan and Natanz, it was a feat that would have taken other armies 3 to 5 years. And 12 days after, as I followed on the media streams, synagogues around the globe, in America and elsewhere, they said, "Come to shul today. We're going to daven Hallel." And my immediate response was, no, you can't daven Hallel. You see, I was worried that Omer Nutra's mother, Omer Nutra is a boy from Long Island who, when he graduated high school, he decided to go to Israel and serve in the IDF. He was on his tank on October the 7th when Hamas terrorists grabbed him, took him over the border, and he is now declared KIA, killed in action. His body is still being held there, but his parents have begun the mourning process. So what happens when Omer Nutra's mom, a proud conservative Jew, whose son Omer went to Schechter and to Sprout Lake camps, she comes to say Kaddish for her son, and they're davening Hallel. Do you think she's in any place to daven Hallel while she's saying Kaddish for her boy who's still being held captive? What if Evyatar David's mom, who stood on this bima not long ago, what if she came to shul to say a Misha Berach, praying to God to give her son just a little bit more energy, a little bit more focus, a touch more pita, so that he can survive another day and some deal will happen and bring him home? And she's going to hear Hallel? She's prepared to hear that? That's why I was opposed to it. Because for some, Iran was a 25-year existential threat of a nuclear regime that wanted to eradicate the state of Israel, and we have set it back at worst, eradicated it at best, and this is where we are. We should celebrate. But for the Nutras, and for the Davids, and for so many others, they're here now. They want their child either to come and put a flower by their bed where they can come and remember them forever, or to hold his embrace and feel his beating heart again. Their recency bias is radically different. And there are a group of people, for better or for worse, good people, smart people, kind people, thoughtful people, who October 7th, 2023, was years ago to them. It was so long ago. It's part of ancient history. And the Holocaust for some of those people, that was around the same time frame as the signing of the Magna Carta. And Hiroshima is on the same timeline as Greek mythology. And me? Well, I see it differently. For them, they see destruction in Gaza, they see starving children, and they see that as a result of Israeli aggression today and yesterday. And I bet most of you in this room, we see that as causality. I see it as a direct result of October 7th attacks, of the holding of hostages, of the commitment to promise to fulfill these crimes again. My recency bias has me holding on October 8th, 2023. That's where I'm living today. It's the longest day in humanity for me. It's 2 years later, and I'm still on October 8th. And for some of you in this room, some of you who grew up, who saw your parents' forearms and the numbers that were on them, you're still living in the time that the Holocaust was happening, is happening, and will happen again. It is an ancient history. It's yesterday for you. And then there's a group of people where today is October 2nd, 2025. It's today. They're thinking about tomorrow. And how many of us walk in this room and we're behaving the same way and thinking in the same mindset about meaningful relationships in our life? We're walking in this room on October 2nd, 2025, but we're walking in with a figurative backpack that is filled with pain, with hurt, with distrust, with mistreatment, with cruelty. And some have moved past it, and some just justify it, but we're there. And this holiday is supposed to be about erasing the past. We're supposed to turn the wounds into scars. Well, I have scars on my body, and most of those scars are beyond feeling. They're numb. But when I look at them, I remember the pain. I might not feel it when I touch it, but I remember it. And what happens? Someone turns to us and says, I don't like the tone in which you spoke to me. I don't like the way you reprimanded our children and how tough you were on them. I don't like the way that you told me I was doing something wrong in front of my colleagues. And then we return to them and say, oh yeah? Well, I didn't like what you said to me 13 years ago before we went to the gala. I didn't like the way you said I looked not so good in that dress. I don't like the way you said ABC or XYZ. And then the vicious cycle begins. And what starts as stones becomes bullets, and then grenades, then rockets, and then you have Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima. A never-ending cycle of because and consequence and causality. And you don't even know where one began. And this day, Yom Kippur, is a day that's supposed to end the vicious cycle, to give us pause. But let's face it, it doesn't end today. It never really ends. We're not going to drive up the driveway going to our breakfast or hit next Tuesday and think all of the wrongs that happened to us and all the pain and scars no longer cause ill feelings. It's just not going to happen. Dory is still going to feel what she feels at Hiroshima, and I'm still going to think in Hiroshima about Pearl Harbor. So why is it so hard? Why is it so difficult for us to see that perspective? What causes me to put a blockade and not get into that place where Dory is? And what causes her to say, how is he able to go 25 years ago? Why can't he think about now? When I know that both of us are pretty good at remembering hurt from 25 years ago, we might have caused the other. One of the big reasons we are so afraid, we're so afraid of that vulnerability, of going to that place, is that I feel that if I say to Dory, oh, you're right, Hiroshima is horrific, the pain is unspeakable, 100,000 innocents gone is criminal, I shouldn't be thinking about Pearl Harbor, that what I'm really doing in that moment is I'm jettisoning my own feelings, my own worth. I'm removing my own validation. And we do the same thing when we say, oh, it's terrible. These kids starving in Gaza or the destruction that's happening. We sense that when we say that or do that, that it will remove the idea that we no longer have empathy, appreciation, compassion for those families that are bereaved and living in fear on the Gaza envelope and around. That by going to that other place, We remove that history. That's our danger. It scares us. How do we fix it? Can we fix it? I remember when I was third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, if you were really good in class, towards the end of the day, the teacher would pick you for that coveted job of washing down the chalkboard. Oh, wow, you just hope you were that person. You could talk about it in the carpool, you could live it up for a week, and you didn't have to do any of the assignments that everyone else was doing. And when you were chosen for that chalkboard, you would take that gross sponge and dip it into that soapy bucket and get on the step stool in Mrs. Gallagher's class and go to the corner and work your way down and clean that board, and it would look pristine, and it would look perfect, and it would be black, and it would be shiny, and all the lessons and stories and homework assignments would be erased. And then something would happen. A few minutes later, a few days later. But slowly, chalk residue would start to appear without writing. Maybe it was a lesson that was on there from a few hours ago, or maybe it was a lesson that was on the board for so long that it was even harder to erase and it just came back up. But it was there. You couldn't erase it. It came back. It was still there. It was still giving its lesson. So I thought to myself, what if I came up with some fantastic invention? I brought it to the Shark Tank, a special soap or cleaner that could erase the slate and nothing would reappear. Or what if we had unlimited funds for schools where we could just buy a new chalkboard every week or every year, and everyone could literally start with a clean slate? You know what? I think that is a horrible idea. Atrocious. Because it's on that chalkboard that we not only write the lessons of today and what will become history, but we appreciate the history that's on there from before. If we had a clean chalkboard, there'd be no grit, no context, no way to put anything into a perspective. But when you clean that chalkboard with the soapy water and that residue comes back up, and you see it again, well, then those lessons have resonance in our lives, and then they have purpose. And it doesn't mean that that's the end of the story there, because all of us still have chalk in our hands, and all of us can continue to write those lessons, and depending on how we write those lessons, how hard they go on the board, and how long they stay up there, they'll continue to be part of our history. Today is a day when the rabbis and the liturgists, they tell us, wipe the slate clean. We're not going to wipe the slate clean. We're not going to drive down the driveway to break fast and everything will be forgiven. That the painful thing our spouse did, or our kid did, or our colleague did will then be magically forgotten. It's just not going to happen. But there is a way for us to wash it and to appreciate the things that have happened that will still bring those pieces back into visibility so they have context in our history. You know what I've wanted so badly for these last 2 years? I wanted someone who's not in this room, someone who's not Jewish, someone who's not part of my tribe, someone who's not part of a group that I abhor, to come up to me and put their arms on my shoulders and say, God, if I were a Jew and I were a Zionist like you, David, I'd be really scared now too. I would find all the justification to continue to go into Gaza and wreak destruction only to get the hostages back and to ensure that an evil group like this could never do that again. God, I've been dying for that level of empathy. For someone to just put their hands on my shoulder who's not part of the same team and to say that. And frankly, it's been crickets for most people. They don't say it. And then I started thinking, who in my life is looking for the same thing from me? Who's looking for me to put my hands on their shoulders and look them in the eye and say, I can understand the hurt you're feeling, the distrust that's in your heart, the sadness in your soul for the actions I did, the absences where I wasn't present, for the dismissive tone. And while I could excuse it or explain it away, it doesn't remove the wound that then became a scar that might not even hurt when you touch it, but when you look at it, it does. I know that I need to do that with some people, and I can't only wait for people to do it for me. This is a day when we all are reaching down into that soapy water with the sponge, and we're not getting a new board, we're just cleaning it. And we're realizing our responsibility to write new lessons and to remember the old ones, and to be appreciative, compassionate, empathetic, and understanding of the recency biases that others are working at, and to find place in our hearts, our souls, and our minds to begin anew so that we can have the opportunities and peace that this day and this year is gifted upon us. Gemar Chatima Tova, everyone. A good final inscription.